today we are going to speak. I don't think I should use the microphone.
No.
Okay. I would like to be informal. Please interrupt me anytime if you have any questions or you want to comment on that. And I would like to speak about constructivism and to prove it to you why it was of great value. And the life was short. Obviously. And so what we're going to speak about is the roots and origins of constructivism. We shall speak why it was dismissed so quickly, so briefly. And we will look at the impact of constructivism on contemporary Moscow. We're not going to speak about contemporary Moscow at the end, but I will try to show you some allusions, some buildings which took constructivism as inspiration or referred to that. And we all know that Moscow is a very, very old city, and once we say we're going to Moscow to our friends and colleagues, they always imagine the Kremlin towers and this strong center of Moscow. But Moscow is also a huge city with residential and industrial areas, with universities, theaters, and we also know that it has fantastic architecture of the 18th and 19th century. We can really lost our ways in the streets of Moscow. Everybody knows the 16th century St. Basil's Cathedral with its dance of towers, and those brilliant, absolutely asymmetrical and flamboyant churches of the 17th centuries around this area, which are asymmetrical because there was a little bit of independence of people, a little bit of democracy after the troubled times. And I would like to draw attention to this idea of asymmetry, which we shall see in constructivism. It was replaced, I mean, the 17th century architecture was replaced by grandiose palaces. Though Moscow was not the capital of Russia at that time, Peter the Great moved it to St. Petersburg in 1703, but here this is the expression of autocratic power in symmetry, in columns, porticos, sculptures, and narrative reliefs. Art Nouveau brought new ideas of the new class, bourgeois class, entrepreneurial class, mixture of different classes, and Hotel Metropole shows that people started to travel more using trains and boats, and this was Moscow before the revolution. The Soviet period after 1917 played the greatest role in urban development, and it really changed the city completely. It is divided, it can be divided into constructivism of the first 2 dozen years of the Soviet period, dismissed by Stalinist architecture. Sometimes they call it Stalinist, sometimes Soviet architecture. For me it is Art Deco, but Stalinist or Soviet Art Deco. And then post-war modernism, expressed during Khrushchev, Brezhnev, and then Perestroika, opened doors to postmodernistic ideas in Moscow. And this is Moscow as we see it now, from the 22nd floor of the Academy of Sciences, with Stalinist towers, with huge developed residential areas in the Soviet period. But now let's go back to March of 1918. The government decides to go back to Moscow from St. Petersburg, back to the roots. Why? There are many ideas why. Away from the bureaucratic St. Petersburg, which was not supportive of the Bolshevik power. But anyway, Moscow was not the capital for 200 years. It means what? That there were not enough public offices, there were not enough living facilities for the bureaucrats. And we know that after each change, after each revolution, the number of bureaucrats grows. The country, the whole country was in political and economic disaster or turbulence. There was nothing to eat, there was nothing to put into the stoves to keep the houses warm, and the winters were quite cold, the climate did not cooperate, and the government came to the city, which was also against Bolshevism. The traditions were quite strong, the bourgeois class was quite strong. So, apart from the problems which were in St. Petersburg, they saw new problems of not enough office space. But the ideas were, of course, to create a new ideology, to expand the revolution to other countries, but the country suffered, I mean the Soviet Russia suffered from brain drain. Not only famous and talented people abandoned the country, but also just educated, well-educated people went to Germany, to France, then to the United States, to Latin America, to China, and there was also a tremendous shortage of construction materials. They wanted to build, but what to build off. They decided to start with the state plans, how to change Moscow. To change Moscow image meant to get rid of the older coordinates. A lot of churches in the anti-religious campaign were demolished. The property changed hands. They put a lot of people into private homes, into private apartments. A couple of days ago, I visited one lady in the area of Taganka, who is still living in her house, which was bought by her family in 1850s. So she managed to stay there. But she told me that after the revolution, they moved about 30 people into the house, and then in a couple of years, there were about 100 people living in the house where the family had used to live. So it's what was happening is really unbelievable. I'm showing you this church. Assumption, it doesn't exist. They destroyed it. One of the most beautiful examples of the 17th century. But the tiny little two-storied house, which you can see at the foot of the church, is still there. There is a coffee shop. One of the most important things was that Lenin signed the decree of the demolition of all the monuments to the czars and their servants, as it was worded. And if you look at the monument to the Romanov family, which was the first one to be transferred into the Soviet, they erased all the names of the Romanovs, put the names of the revolutionary leaders and thinkers like Marx and Engels and many others. But now Perestroika is bringing this back again. It was turned into the same monument by a friend of mine, actually, Salavat Chekhov. He put a double-headed eagle on the top, and he returned the names of the czars back to this obelisk. But the ideas of simplicity were very much appropriate for the Soviet Russia, which did not have enough materials to build and wanted to build a lot of social housing, a lot of constructions which would solve a lot of social problems. But this was not really absolutely new. A lot of architects in the West were thinking about the same, trying to use the aesthetics of geometry and to solve social problems which existed since the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, which was expressed in the metal construction and very simple construction, for example, as Crystal Palace in London, which was destroyed in the fire. And the first ideas of the simplicity and of functionalities was expressed by Gottfried Zemper, who built with excessive details, but he was thinking of functionality material and the treatment of material, that there will be a lot of housing and a lot of schools and hospitals, enough for everybody. Frank Lloyd Wright was thinking about the same thing, using the aesthetics of geometry. Here you can see cylinders and belts of windows, which would be very much appreciated in Moscow. That's one of his works in the US, with parallel ceilings, balconies, and the same ideas were expressed by Bauhaus in Germany with the industrial design. What is good for us is what is practical. So let's go practical. Everything should be practical, industrial, and this is the beauty. One of the Bauhaus members came to Russia. A lot of Germans actually were working in Russia at that time. Some Americans came to work, and they contributed a lot into the idea of what Moscow should look like. Ludwig van der Rohe, also another Bauhaus representative, he loved flat surfaces which can reflect the light. And one of the famous avant-garde architects in France, Le Corbusier, he also suggested things which would be admired by Russian constructivists. But in Russia there was also a certain movement into the direction of simplicity. You can see that this house near the metro station of Kitai-Gorod, it has some columns, it has a certain portico, but you can see that windows are getting bigger and bigger because the industry could produce enough of big and flat glass. And at the same time, there were ideas of constructivism and avant-garde in the air. The new group of artists who were not only academic, who were not only educated in academia, but they came from the grassroots. They came from people, and they did a lot of work with their hands. They had to work hard to learn a lot. Vladimir Tatlin, for example, visited Paris, as many artists visited, but he visited as a sailor, working very hard and then saving some money to go away from Marseille to Paris. Kazimir Malevich showed his geometrical object, and he insisted that this was the beauty expressed in art and architecture. And here we see these people who decided not to leave Russia but to stay. Actually, it is very difficult for architects to leave the place, the landscape where they usually worked at that time. Tatlin builds his fantastic tower. It's just a model. It has never been accomplished. And to imagine the size, we should see this artist's dream of St. Petersburg with this huge tower. So it was a spiral meant to allow trucks, and crowds of people to go up with huge constructions inside. For sure, at that time, with the technology which existed, they were not able to afford such as constructions. Vladimir Chekhov builds his famous radio tower, and these things would influence architecture of the 20th and 21st century. You can see this work of Norman Foster, which everybody knows in London, his famous Gherkin, and also his sketches, which remind of Tatlin and Chekhov very much. Norman Foster often says that he's inspired by Vladimir Chekhov. And these Tatlin's ideas can be seen during the construction of skyscrapers in Moscow and in many other places. When they're covered with glass, they became very still, very formal, and they express contemporary wealth, contemporary desire to go high, contemporary desire to earn a lot of money. This is the expression of the dominance of services and money. And this is a funny thing in Moscow on the Patriarch Ponds. It is called Patriarch, this building, very religious name. but it's a residential house with a Tundra tower on top, and the whole building is composed of citations from various time periods, including Stalinist architecture and palaces, which I have shown to you. How to develop Moscow? So we are jumping from one time period to another. Ivan Zheltovsky and Alexei Shusev, who had been known before the revolution for their palaces, Shusev built the Kazansky train station. So they suggested that the center of Moscow, bureaucratic center, should be moved out, and that we should preserve our historical, our cultural heritage, and that we should not build high downtown. Le Corbusier suggested another plan. He suggested the same thing to many different places. We destroy everything and create the grid. Then it will be easy and there would be no transportation problems. Another dreamer is Nikolai Lodovsky, who suggested this strange serpent, and he thought that sooner or later Moscow and Leningrad, St. Petersburg now would be connected. Really, we see now very strong urbanization along the highway from Moscow to St. Petersburg. There were ideas of city gardens, which also were quite spread in Germany and in France, and they tried to build certain green towns inside Moscow, and some are still alive. In Sokol, you can see construction of 1920s, 1930s by some leading architects. It was possible because Lenin signed a decree on cooperative construction. So people came together, brought their money, and they built something. There were very many attacks during the post-Soviet period to build something highly and destroy these old houses. My favorite plan or idea is by Boris Sakulin, who was a topographer, who was also economist, and he suggested that old centers are connected with several rings of public transportation, of trains. And if this had happened, we would not have had all these problems of construction without any transportation services. Now with what is happening in Moscow region, there's horrible traffic jams and lack of infrastructure, lack of schools, hospitals, kindergartens, etc., etc. But at the same time, while they were thinking about the future of Moscow, really dreaming, sitting in very cold offices or studios with very little food and very little clothes to buy and keep them warm, they decided to open the exhibition of agriculture and crafts in 1923 on the site of the contemporary Gorky Park. And this exhibition presented the whole variety of solutions and ideas, and it gave some work to the architects who had not immigrated, who had not left Moscow. You can see Christ the Savior Cathedral still in place, the old one. And the surprise was that Konstantin Melnikov suggested that he would build this tobacco pavilion. It was called Mahorka, or tobacco, for the tobacco company. It was the new economic policy. Private activities were allowed at the same time. And here he just used very simple geometrical constructions, including this round window and staircases. So the owner of the company said, no, I don't want to have this. I want some columns, I want some sculptures, I want something attractive, maybe something oriental, because when we sell tobacco, we use oriental style. But luckily, Shusev, who was the director of the exhibition, said, this is the great idea. And young Konstantin Melnikov was seen, was recognized, and he got a very good proposal to build the USSR pavilion in Paris in 1925. And that was the time when Art Deco was declared, was announced as the style. And German pavilion, Italian pavilion were all with columns, with heavy built sculptures, with those archaic Greek goddesses. And Melnikov builds this pavilion for the Soviet Union. He got the first award. Le Corbusier, who visited the exhibition, said, leaving the exhibition area, there is only one pavilion which is worth seeing, which is the Soviet pavilion. And Melnikov happily goes back, and this is his first building, which survived from the market, Chekhov marketplace. And this is how it looked like with avant-garde ideas for the small owners and people who come. He's also famous for his garages, built together with the very old at that time Vladimir Chekhov, the author of the radio tower. So very geometrical, no decor apart from that, and it still has a very strong influence on Moscow landscape. This is a contemporary office in Zamoskvorechye on Sadovnicheskaya embankment. Melnikov participated in the construction of Workers' Club. He's considered to be the poet of a Workers' Club. What is a Worker Club? This is the place where illiterate peasants who became workers and came to Moscow, they were educated, they were taught how to read and write. So those were educational centers where people were kept away from drinking. They also attended some clubs of how to play chess or how to sing or dance. And Melnikov designed 5 those clubs. I would say that they are romantic and sort of naive if they declare that they are practical. I wouldn't say they were practical. They were built of cheap materials with very sophisticated constructions. This is like a theater with boxes which come out, but it looks like what, like ball bearing or a certain industrial part. He was also allowed to build his own private home, which is unique. Nobody was allowed to build private homes at that time, but he said that this would be an example for a small family, and then we will disseminate this idea. So he used cylinders as an idea. So now it's a part of the Museum of Architecture. There were other brilliant authors who created workers' clubs. This one is near Belaruskaya metro station in Lesnaya Street, made by Ilya Golosov. So it looks like another spare part, a cylinder, something moves to and fro. And please pay attention to the fact that they are all asymmetrical, they're all flexible, they all move. They're not frozen because there was no strong power. Though Red Terror was in place, but there were a lot of political parties, there were a lot of associations of architects and poets and musicians. This would not be the case in Stalin's era. You can see that the windows are of different sizes and shapes. And it also has a very strong influence on contemporary construction. You can see this house in Gilirovskovo Street, also in the same style, but much bigger with more glass, built from the reinforced cement. And these workers' clubs, like Vladimir's club, can be seen all over Moscow. It's amazing how much they managed to build in a very short period of time. The first constructions appeared around 1926-27. By 1932, it was all over, all done. And you can see public offices, schools, You can see communal houses, residential areas. It's like an anthem to industrialization, looking at spare parts or as production factories. They bring the idea that very soon there will be enough production of everything, and we will be all happy. And it's like creating some kind of revolution and bringing this revolution outside the borders of the Soviet Union. So this is another example by Alexei Shusev, who will be the author of Lenin's Mausoleum after Lenin's death, but he was the creator of many beautiful churches before the revolution. So here you can see again the idea of cylinders, belts, of windows, balconies, no decor, just the aesthetics of geometry. And this is the impact. These are contemporary Moscow offices which took a lot from Constructivism. Le Corbusier built a very special thing in Moscow in Мясницкая Street. This is why this is special, because he was the only one who got natural material, natural stone, to finish the building. Here he uses his favorite columns, this, centipede legs. He uses the flat roofs and the garden on top. Of course, the garden would not survive in Moscow at that time. Only contemporary technologies with heated pots could allow people to have gardens on top of their roofs. This is probably the first building in Moscow with complete glass walls. The glass walls became possible when they learned how to build the skeletons of metal, and the walls stopped being carriers of the roof, so no, they do not carry anything. And this is the interior of Le Corbusier building with the spirals, with these slopes, very nicely, very beautifully done, and how this was built when cement was brought by horses, when they used cheap wood and low quality metal. Le Corbusier is overlooking this process, and we can see the influence right away at some of the office buildings. Another strange thing and another important landmark of that time is the communal houses, communal life. The revolutionaries who came to Moscow, they immediately transformed grand hotels in sort of communal apartments. Hotel National, Astoria, Metropole, this is where people lived and worked. The smell of ink mixed with the smell of frying potatoes. Secretaries rushed from one door to another. Children were playing in broad corridors. But very quickly they realized that this was not enough. Something should be done about the housing. Moscow was growing up very quickly. A lot of people during the revolution came to Moscow. And this is one of the first communal houses or communal apartments, which you can see. It's a work of Moisei Ginsburg. What is a communal apartment? It's common life. It is the place where the rooms were very small. Sometimes they had kitchens. Sometimes they didn't have any kitchens. Sometimes they had a very small corner to cook something. But usually they had a common kitchen for everybody, or a canteen where they could go and get what they want, either bring into the room or eat together. There were common bathrooms or showers, places to work, to fix up what they needed, maybe to do some sewing or fix up their watches, and common places for common leisure time. This is the work by Ivan Nikolaev near Shabalovka. I read some interesting articles about the opening of this place. the desire of doing everything together was expressed in this small article, but it was in Evening Moscow. Could be correct or could not be correct, but it was mentioned there that everybody should go to sleep at the same time and wake up at the same time. To make this happen, they pumped sleeping gas into the ventilation system. They might have done it once or twice, you know, but we should understand that this was the time when they wanted to change the flow of the rivers, when they wanted to inseminate chimpanzee with human semen and vice versa. They had those, you know, phenomenal ideas of how to change life. It's not by mistake that they wanted to keep Lenin alive, because they were playing with human biology quite a lot. And Russia was very much advanced in biological studies, also chemistry and many other sciences. But the best example of communal apartment, which was not really a communal apartment, it was only a slogan, because very quickly they realized that some people should be supported much stronger than the other people. So if you have a distribution system, but some people should have a very quick and very good access to the distribution centers. That's why Boris Yeltsin builds the house on the embankment, the house for the Soviet government, for the Soviet elite, on the bank on the Moscow River. You can see that this is also the statics of geometry. It looks like a sort of, you know, industrial production, some kind of, I don't know, chemical production or metallurgical plant with, I don't know, a huge oven, which is not an oven but or a stove, but this is a movie theater. This is the place where they created 800 apartments. They had their own canteens, restaurants, warehouses where they distributed fabric for costumes or dresses. They had kindergartens, they had movie theater, they had a theater. So it was a huge complex. And each apartment was quite well furnished with identical furniture, but solid, made of very good wood, with a set of dishes there, and also a set of containers to go and bring some food from the canteen into the apartment. Now they have a very nice museum there where you can see some of the furniture, some of the things which people did jointly. Another example of this time, these are workers' residential areas which appeared close to the former productions, industrial productions like this one, which was Kaiser and Vanguard forgery in the east of Moscow on Vladimir highway, now Chaussée Enthusiastov, highway of enthusiasts, it was called the highway of enthusiasts because it was the road to Siberia, to where people were sent when they were sentenced to prisons or camps. Very enthusiastic. And so they also built university campuses. This is the view from where I grew up, the apartment I grew up. My parents were professors at Moscow Power Engineering Institute. This is another university. This is a group of research centers in Lefortovo. Science and research was booming in this short period of time. Mm-hmm. And now I have a question to you. So it's such a well-known building, such a well-known construction. Is it constructivism or not?
More like Art Nouveau.
Art Nouveau. Well, Art Nouveau or Art Deco, Art Nouveau. But so you don't think that this is constructivism? No?
Flat roof.
Yes, so we have different opinions, but maybe we can discuss it a little bit. So we have flat roofs like Monsieur Le Corbusier suggested, and which was quite commonly used here in constructivism. Then we have this aesthetics of geometry, obviously, but there is something which may be lacking there. What is the functionality? What is the functionality? Constructivism suggested that everything should be very functional. Either it's an office, or it's a production of bread, or shoes, or boots, or you know, huge devices. But what's that? What is the function? What is the main purpose of this building?
Eternity.
Eternity. Absolutely. What is the function? Eternity. To be, yes. So, and this is a very interesting turning point in Russian art, in Russian architecture, in politics. Because what happened? Lenin died in cold January of 1924. And it's still unclear who would be in charge, who would be in power. There is Leo Trotsky, Bukharin, Zinovieva, Kamenev, many others. They're all, you know, they're all nervous. They want to keep this system. They want to keep the country which they managed to gain. And here, Joseph Stalin appears as a choreographer for the first time. Just imagine what's happening. Lenin died far away from Moscow in a beautiful country state of Gorky. Now it is called Leninsky Gorky. So it was cold. His body is brought by train to Moscow. People are freezing, standing and waiting for Lenin to come. I'm not quite sure that they came there by themselves. It was all organized. Now, the coffin with his body is brought to the center of Moscow, to the Council of Unions, and so there is a line of people waiting to say goodbye. The fires are burning all over Moscow. It is very cold, and people would remember the reflection of fires in dark windows. No electricity at that time, but it was all organized, all choreographs. Why there were so many people? There was no proper radio. There was no there were no telephones, no cell phones, no TV. But somehow there were a lot of people to say goodbye. So that's how Stalin organized that. Then they decided to keep Lenin's body for a little while, for 2 weeks. Then they decided to keep it for good. And who would create Lenin's tomb? Who would be the creator? And here, there is one little thing that we should remember now. Do you know what was the background of Joseph Stalin? What was his education? Shall I articulate that?
Yeah, that's right.
Priest seminary.
Ah?
A Georgian priest seminary.
A Georgian priest who never became a priest.
Yeah.
So he knew the role of rituals, sacred places, and he was quite educated. He knew several languages. He traveled to England quite a lot on business matters, terrorism. And so, whom to invite? And his choice was to contract Alexei Shusev, who was famous not only for his Kazansky train station, but for numerous churches. And here you can see, this is Marfa and Mary church and nunnery in the Moskvarechye, opened by the sister of Russian Empress Alexander. Her name was Elizabeth. When her husband, who was the governor of Moscow, Sergei Romanov, was killed, assassinated, so she decided to retire. But she was a very elegant lady. Lots of portraits, a lot of photos still available of her. And she ordered the design of costumes from Viktor Vasnetsov, who was one of the most famous artists. And he ordered the main church and the design of the nunnery from Alexei Shusev. and the interiors were painted by Mikhail Nesterov. One of the best designs, one of the best churches. So, Stalin wants him. And what design? Of course, it should not be a church. But he wants something forever. And Alexei Shusov, who was very talented, but his biggest talent was to focus, to see the needs and to serve the needs of his clients. He was able to deal with the members of the royal family, with the members of the entrepreneurial class, and he was able to serve Stalin to the most. So he, from day one, he suggested the first plan. It was a wooden mausoleum made as a pyramid. Then there was the second mausoleum, also wooden, made as a pyramid. And then finally, in 1930, he built this mausoleum of red granite with very laconic black labradorite belt, which says Lenin. So that's forever, that's for good. And this is the turning point of politics. By 1932, 1931, 1932, Stalin would get rid of all his competitors. He would send out Trotsky away. He would kill Bukharin, Kamenev, Zinoviev, who would be the sole leader of the country. And he would look at Egyptian art as the source of inspiration. Stalinist skyscrapers, still sculptures, narrative reliefs, this would all come from this distance culture, but it served the needs quite well. And another mystery: who made the coffin for Stalin? Who made the coffin for Lenin? Who was the author who also created it overnight, very quickly? It was Konstantin Melnikov. For him, it was, I would say it was natural, because he created things for the future. His creations were quite light. And so he was a part of this new world. He was not a part of the Egyptian art, but he was the part of constructivism, of avant-garde, epotage, avant-garde. So he created this coffin. But actually it was the coffin of constructivism. That was the end of constructivism. Melnikov would not build anything at all after this change. That was it. His prime time was over. He would go to other Russian towns. He would teach mathematics. He would teach drawing. He would return. He would teach at the University of Construction, not at architecture, but construction. But he would not do anything for the new style. So that was the end. The coffin you see now there, it's not by Melnikov. It was lost when Lenin's body was evacuated during World War II to the Ural area. But the impact of constructivism is quite noticeable. I have shown you some of the buildings which use constructivist illusions, but constructivism allowed to understand forms and shapes much better, because there was no something which interfered with the geometry. But it was not really very practical, though they announced the practicality of that. And so there were a lot of messages, because when we see buildings, there are a lot of semiotics, messages, symbolism about that, because the messages were of equality, and even in the house on the embankment there is an idea of equality, maybe bureaucratic, but equality. And so the idea also to be happy with what you have, and the role of technology. They tried to show technology, but they could not, because there was not enough cement, there was not enough brick, enough metal. Some of the houses were made of wood and covered with plastering, so they tried to pretend of being technological, of being made of good materials. And now some of them are covered with plastic siding, Some are covered with some very cheap tiles, shiny tiles, but they're still alive. And dream cities, it will be a very noticeable influence on Stalinist plan of Moscow 1935, which we see. And so constructivism, really, it really had a very short life on Earth, but so we can see the relations with constructivism. Quite interesting that in 1935-1956, so it was considered as formalism, and it was banned, and they criticized that. They criticized Le Corbusier, they criticized Melnikov, they criticized everybody who built in this time and recommended to put some reliefs and decor, because it couldn't speak of the glory of power. They could not, praise Stalin. Then, after Stalin's death, it was criticized, but it was used to create simple forms. Khrushchev goes to modernism. He suggested these 5-story buildings and many other things. And now people sort of, look down to constructivism. They make jokes about it in constructions, but at the same time, it is present even in huge skyscrapers. And so we have to say a farewell to constructivism, looking at the building designed by Ilya Golosov. Remember his club with the cylinder and parts sitting on the cylinder? That is Golosov. So you can see that it is still geometry, but this is already symmetrical geometry. Stalinist architecture will be about symmetry. Symmetry is power. It is expressed by absolutism in the 18th, 19th century, and the totalitarian regimes of Hitler or Mussolini, they also loved symmetry and heavy construction. So you can see that this building looks like a sphinx with 2 sculptures, a worker and the peasant dressed like Greek goddess, but she has a rifle in her hand. Monumental propaganda, new time. That's it. Thank you very much.